When we talk about economic development, I think it's important not to forget that you can't talk about economic development or economic success without talking about where one's preference for pro-unification or pro-independence comes into play.
That plays a big role in that.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Let's move on to another slide here, number 10 here. This is for the same group. They also asked people their opinions on China, whether respondents supported independence, unification, maintaining the status quo. Now, let's look at the total there. All respondents, we have two large categories in the center for people who support independence or the status quo. But it's a very different story if you divide them up into Han supporters and Tsai supporters. With the Han supporters, the largest group, 68% there, support the status quo. In other words, no change in relations between Taiwan and China. But they also have a very large red box, which you don't see at the bottom there, and that is people supporting unification, 12.6% there. If you look at Tsai supporters, it's a totally different story, 73.8% supporting independence,
wow,
20.8% supporting the status quo. Now, I should caution you, we have to remember that the people who responded to these are also people who showed up at political rallies, so they might be,
of course,
much more extreme in their views than the average person who would have voted for one of those two parties today.
Yeah, I think, obviously methods should be taken into account. But really for me, the bigger thing that should be taken into account is understanding that when you ask someone what independence means and what unification means, is there is no one answer for what independence is or what unification is. In fact, understandings of these two terms varies widely across both camps.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. Can we dig into that a little bit more? What are some possible different understandings of the word independence or unification?
Of course. So kind of the two biggest kind of types of independence people talk about is this idea of Huadu, 中华民国独立, versus Taidu, which is Taiwan 独立.
So,
and what's the difference? Can
independence of the Republic of China as opposed to independence of Taiwan. Okay, what is the difference?
So, a independent ROC recognizes Taiwan as the ROC as an independent country.
Okay.
Which means that this island, as the Republic of China, is independent from the PRC, the People's Republic of China.
Okay.
That it doesn't necessarily need a name change, a constitutional change. That it can exist within this existing ROC framework that the KMT brought over and developed, and that we now live in.
That seems to be a very small part of the population that believes in this type of independence.
Not necessarily, actually. So, for example, Tsai Ing-wen herself is very what many would describe as Huadu. So, for example, in the last week, there was a scandal within the DPP where one of their spokespersons made too overstated of a comment, or at least was perceived as too overstated by a lot of media, as being indicating that unification was, equated with treason, which again overstated. But whenever this kind of thing happens, Tsai Ing-wen has to kind of double down on her stance that she's not against any sort of China identity. In fact, she herself said that we live in 中华民国.
And which is the Republic of China.
Republic of China, and I am the president of 中华民国.
Okay, which is interesting because I think Han supporters and even Han Kuo-yu himself had criticized her for not saying Republic of China
enough,
but she does say
and
that,
she
regularly.
Has for a long time. And so when I say things like the DPP isn't necessarily a pro-independence party, a lot of the time, my reason being is because politicians like Tsai Ing-wen and even Lai Ching-te have said repeatedly that Taiwan, 中华民国 Taiwan, 已经是独立的.
We are
already independent as the ROC.
So we don't need to declare independence.
We don't need to do anything. So, and this is arguably a bit of a pro-status quo attitude.
It is, and it's trying to satisfy the independent supporters by saying we already are, but then not rock the boat with China. Right?
Exactly. Now, versus someone who says they're Taidu,
right?
That generally infers that they want this island not to be called 中华民国, not the ROC, but Taiwan Guo, the country of Taiwan.
That would mean changing the flag, changing all of the constitution.
And that is rocking the boat.
So what are the differences in terms of different types of unification?
So within the, and this is actually something that I think is a little bit under-researched, because I think it's very interesting to ask people who support closer ties with China what it takes for unification. Now, of course, there are parties like the new party, Xindang, who I went to their rally a couple months ago, They say that unification is the only path for Taiwan, immediate unification with the PRC.
Okay.
Now, what that means is to kind of accept the PRC's framework and have Taiwan enter into the PRC as a province of the PRC.
Okay.
Now, there's another type of unification which says that I still identify as Chinese. I am a citizen of the ROC. And one day I would like to unify with China, but we're going to give them democracy. We're going to make China democratic.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Or, for example, I'm pro-unification if China democratizes.
That's a big if.
Now,
But
obviously,
that's saying, yeah.
that's a wild notion.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it shows that there are still people who are what I would describe as kind of ROC nationalists, who still value democracy, who still value Taiwan as it exists, but don't necessarily identify with those who see themselves as Taiwanese. Now, I think looking at trends and polls and opinion data, overwhelmingly, that's becoming a smaller number. There are far more people who see themselves as Taiwanese, as the ROC nationalist kind of cohort is becoming smaller and smaller and older. And those who see themselves as Taiwanese and support some form of kind of more stated independence or more sovereignty for Taiwan, that cohort is only going to grow and grow.